The old man hadn't spoken a single clear sentence in weeks, yet that afternoon, as the young caregiver leaned close and sang a trembling lullaby, a tear slipped from the corner of his eye. In the doorway, a tall man in an expensive suit froze, his hand still on the knob. He hadn't meant to overhear. He definitely hadn't meant to feel something. Before we go any further, if stories about kindness and unexpected blessings touch your heart, make sure you're subscribed to Kindness Teles. Like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. You never know, your story might inspire someone else who needs hope today. The caregiver's name was Emily, and she was 26 years old, working double shifts at a small private nursing home just outside Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't the kind of place that showed up in glossy brochures. The paint peeled in corners, the vending machine in the hallway only worked if you kicked it just right, and most families visited less and less as the years went by. Emily didn't mind the worn linoleum floors or the faint smell of antiseptic that never quite left the air. What weighed on her was the loneliness she saw every day. She had grown up in a modest home herself, raised by a single mother who worked nights as a waitress. There had never been much money, but there had always been warmth. Her mom used to sing while washing dishes, old folk songs and church hymns that drifted softly through their tiny apartment. When Emily started working at the nursing home, she realized many residents hadn't heard someone sing just for them in years. The old man in room 14 was different from the others. His name was Mr. Harrison. He had once owned a chain of manufacturing companies across the Midwest, though Emily only learned that later. To her, he was simply a frail man with cloudy blue eyes and hands that trembled even when resting on the blanket. After a severe stroke, his speech had become broken and unclear. Some days he stared at the ceiling for hours. Other days he muttered fragments no one could quite understand. The staff did their jobs well enough. They changed his bedding, checked his vitals, adjusted his medication. But there was an unspoken belief that he didn't fully register what was happening around him. Emily wasn't so sure. The first week she was assigned to his care, she noticed how his breathing slowed when she spoke gently to him. One evening, as she adjusted his pillows, she caught him staring at her with an intensity that surprised her. On a whim, she began humming the same lullaby her mother used to sing. His fingers twitched. So she sang it again the next day. And the next. Soon, it became part of her routine. After cleaning his room and helping him with his meals, she would pull a chair close to his bed and sing softly. Sometimes she chose hymns. Other times, old classics like, "You Are My Sunshine." She wasn't performing. Her voice wasn't perfect. It cracked sometimes from exhaustion. But it was warm. What Emily didn't know was that Mr. Harrison had a son. Daniel Harrison was 41, sharp-minded, and known in business magazines as one of Ohio's most successful investors. After taking over his father's companies, he had expanded them, sold a few at peak value, and invested in tech startups that turned into million-dollar ventures. He lived in a glass-walled home overlooking a private lake and drove cars most people only saw in commercials. But he rarely visited the nursing home. Not because he didn't care. At least, that's what he told himself. Work was demanding. Meetings ran late. Flights were constant. He had convinced himself that paying for the best private care was enough. Every month, he wrote a check that could have covered several families' mortgages. Surely that meant something. The afternoon he showed up unannounced, it was because of a cancelled meeting. He decided, almost impulsively, to stop by. He hadn't been there in nearly 3 weeks. As he walked down the hallway, he heard singing. It wasn't polished. It wasn't loud. But it was steady and full of something he couldn't immediately name. He slowed his steps. The door to room 14 was slightly open. Through the narrow gap, he saw a young woman sitting close to his father's bed, holding his hand in both of hers as she sang an old hymn he hadn't heard since childhood. His father's eyes were open, focused on her face. And then Daniel saw it, the tear rolling slowly down the side of his father's cheek. His chest tightened. He had never seen his father cry. Not when deals fell through. Not when his wife passed away. Not even after the stroke. Emily didn't notice Daniel at first. She was too focused on Mr. Harrison's faint, shaky whisper. As the song ended, she leaned closer and said softly, "It's okay. I'm right here." Daniel stepped inside then, clearing his throat. Emily startled and stood quickly, apologizing for not realizing he was there. She assumed he might be upset. Some families didn't like staff getting too personal. Instead, Daniel asked quietly, "How long have you been doing that?" She looked confused. "Singing?" He nodded. She shrugged shyly. "A few weeks. He seems calmer when I do." Daniel glanced at his father, whose eyes were still fixed on Emily. Something inside him shifted. He had spent years believing efficiency was the highest form of care. Pay for the best facility. Hire the best doctors. Make sure the bills were never late. But he had never thought to sit and sing. Over the next few days, Daniel returned. At first, he told himself it was to check on medical updates. But somehow, he kept arriving around the same time Emily's shift ended. He would stand by the window, pretending to scroll through emails, while she sang. One evening, as she finished a song, Daniel said quietly, "My mom used to sing that." Emily smiled gently. "It's a beautiful one." He hesitated, then admitted, "I haven't heard it in years." For the first time, he stayed after she left. The room felt emptier without her voice. As weeks passed, Daniel began visiting more regularly. He noticed details he had overlooked before. The worn recliner in the corner. The outdated equipment. The staff stretched thin. He also noticed Emily skipping her lunch break to sit with residents who had no visitors. One night, as they talked in the hallway, he asked why she worked so hard for a job that paid so little. She laughed softly. "Because they're still people. They still feel everything." Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "My mom used to say, if someone can still hear you, they can still feel love." Daniel drove home that night in silence. A few days later, he arrived earlier than usual and found Emily in the break room, quietly wiping her eyes. She tried to brush it off, but he gently asked what was wrong. Her car had broken down. Repairs would cost more than she had saved. She'd been taking 2 buses to work and was worried she might start arriving late. Daniel felt a familiar instinct rise, the one that solved problems with money. He almost reached for his wallet. But something stopped him. He realized this wasn't about charity. It was about dignity. Instead, he asked if she had ever considered going back to school. She admitted she had dreamed of becoming a registered nurse but couldn't afford tuition. He didn't say much then. 2 weeks later, the nursing home staff gathered in the small recreation room. Daniel stood at the front, looking more nervous than he ever had during a corporate presentation. He announced he would be funding a renovation of the entire facility in his father's name. New equipment. Updated rooms. A proper activity center. Then he turned to Emily. He explained that he was also establishing a scholarship fund for caregivers who wanted to advance their medical training. The first recipient would be someone who had shown that compassion mattered as much as credentials. Emily covered her mouth, stunned, as he told her her tuition would be fully covered. Tears filled her eyes, not because of the money, but because someone had noticed. In the months that followed, the nursing home transformed. Fresh paint brightened the hallways. Comfortable chairs replaced broken ones. Families began visiting more often after hearing about the improvements. And Daniel kept coming. He didn't just fund the changes. He sat with his father. He asked Emily to teach him the songs she sang. The first time he tried, his voice was stiff and awkward. But Mr. Harrison's eyes softened at the sound. One evening, as the 3 of them sat together, Mr. Harrison managed to whisper a clear word for the first time in months. Home. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't loud. But it was unmistakable. Daniel squeezed his father's hand, his own eyes shining. Emily continued her studies, attending classes in the evenings and working weekends. It wasn't easy. There were long nights and early mornings. But she carried with her the memory of that first tear sliding down an old man's cheek. Years later, when she graduated as a registered nurse, Daniel and his father were in the front row. Mr. Harrison's health was fragile, but he was there. All of it had started with a simple song. Kindness doesn't always look grand. Sometimes it's a tired young woman pulling a chair closer to a hospital bed. Sometimes it's a son realizing that love requires more than financial support. A small act can open eyes. It can heal regrets. It can ripple outward in ways we never expect. If this story moved you, think about someone in your life who might just need your presence more than your presence. Maybe a phone call. Maybe a visit. Maybe even a song. Share your own kindness stories in the comments. You never know who might be standing quietly in the doorway, watching, and ready to have their life changed too.